What if the real reason no one leaves the Star Wars galaxy isn't some hyperspace barrier? It's that the Force doesn't exist out there. Sit with that for a second. The Force, the thing that binds the galaxy together, the thing Jedi and Sith have waged war over for 1,000 generations, the thing that literally defines what Star Wars is, has an edge, a boundary, a place where it just stops. And what lies beyond that boundary might be the most disturbing idea buried anywhere in Star Wars lore. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to spend 20 minutes talking about hyperspace disturbance zones and mass shadow terminology. The galaxy has a ring of disrupted hyperspace around its outer edge that makes faster-than-light travel out of the galaxy effectively impossible. That's it. That's the mechanic. One sentence. Done. Because the physics aren't the story. The physics never were. The story is what happens to a Force-sensitive mind when it approaches that edge and feels the thing it has depended on since birth start to disappear. Picture yourself as a Jedi. You've never known a single conscious moment without the Force. It whispers, it nudges, it warns you half a second before the blaster bolt leaves the barrel. More intimate than breathing, more constant than your own heartbeat. Now picture flying toward the rim of the galaxy, and with every parsec, that presence gets quieter. The whisper becomes a murmur. The murmur fades to static. And then, nothing. Not silence the way you understand silence, because even silence has texture in the Force. This is the absence of the thing that made silence possible. You are suddenly, catastrophically alone, in a way no living being in the galaxy has vocabulary for, because no one was ever supposed to experience it. The expanded universe, Legends, as Disney rebranded it, explored this with a depth and a darkness that nothing since has come close to matching. Legends explored this far better than anything we've gotten since, and what it painted wasn't adventure, it was horror. The 2010 Wizards of the Coast RPG sourcebook, authored by Rodney Thompson, Sterling Hershey, and Daniel Wallace, described the unknown regions as a realm where the Force itself behaved erratically. Anomalies warped perception, precognition broke down. Jedi navigation techniques, methods that had worked flawlessly for millennia, became unreliable. Force sensitives venturing deep into these outer reaches reported sensations of wrongness. Not danger, wrongness. A feeling that the cosmic fabric they'd always trusted was fraying, going threadbare, becoming something they couldn't recognize. And that was just the preview. The unknown regions are still inside the galaxy. Think about what actually generates the Force. Midichlorians, those microscopic organisms living in every cell of every living thing, serve as conduits between the biological and the metaphysical. The galaxy teems with life on trillions of worlds, and that life produces the ambient field Force sensitives tap into. Now think about what sits between galaxies. Millions of light years of functionally nothing. 1 atom per cubic meter. No ecosystems. No midichlorians. No life generating any Force energy whatsoever. A Force sensitive flying into that void would be like a deep sea creature swimming upward until the pressure its entire biology depends on simply vanishes. The thing holding you together is gone. You come apart. The psychological effects described across Legends sources range from disorientation to outright madness. Experiences consistent with severe sensory deprivation cranked up to a metaphysical scale. Hallucinations, paranoia, a crushing existential dread that goes beyond normal fear into something more primal. It wasn't just that Force users couldn't use the Force out there. They could feel it leaving. They could feel the absence actively, the way you feel cold, not as a presence, but as the aggressive removal of heat. And here's the question that makes this whole thing genuinely unnerving. Is the void between galaxies naturally empty of the Force? Or is something out there actively suppressing it? Is it an accident of cosmic geography or design? Because if it's design, somebody built it, and we might know who. Billions of years before the Republic, before the Jedi Order, before any civilization that left records anyone can still decipher, the galaxy was shaped by beings so powerful that every subsequent culture could only call them gods. The lore knows them by two names, the Celestials and sometimes the Architects. That second name might be more honest. What they did was architecture, on a galactic scale. Troy Denning first introduced the term celestial in his 2005 Dark Nest trilogy, but the conceptual groundwork had been laid years earlier. Daniel Wallace and Jason Fry's Essential Atlas, published in 2009, confirmed that the architects referenced in older sources and the Celestials were the same civilization. And what we know about them reads less like science fiction and more like mythology. They didn't just build things, they assembled star systems. Centerpoint Station, a massive construct found in the Corellian system, was capable of generating gravitic fields powerful enough to move planets and ignite stars. The entire Corellian system, all 5 habitable worlds, was essentially assembled by the Celestials. They used the Killiks, an insectoid hive species, as laborers. They employed the Qua as servants. They manipulated stellar geography the way lesser civilizations shape clay. Then there's the Maw. That cluster of black holes near Kessel? Not natural. Another celestial construction, a gravitational prison, a knot of warped space-time built for purposes the lore still debates. Some sources call it a weapon. Others call it a containment structure. Containment. That word echoes pretty loud when you start asking why the galaxy has a wall around it. Jason Fry's Essential Guide to Warfare, Author's Cut, published on StarWars.com on September 27, 2013, contains one of the most significant passages in all of Legends lore. It explores the theory that the Celestials didn't just build individual megastructures, they built the barrier itself. The proposed mechanism is staggering. The Celestials may have tapped the energies of the galactic core, the supermassive black hole at the galaxy's center, and used that energy to generate the hyperspace disturbance zone ringing the galaxy's edge. They spun up the wall using the galaxy's own heart as a power source. This wasn't a fence. It was a fundamental restructuring of the galaxy's relationship with hyperspace, making it effectively impossible to enter or leave through faster-than-light travel. There's a compelling thread connecting the Celestials to the Ones, the father, the son, and the daughter that Anakin Skywalker encountered on Mortis during the Clone Wars animated series. Material in the Dark Nest trilogy and the Fate of the Jedi novel series supports the idea that the Ones were either remnants of or directly connected to the celestial civilization. If that's true, then the beings who built the galactic barrier were themselves beings of the Force, entities who understood, better than anyone, that the Force had limits. They would have known exactly where those limits were, and they may have built the barrier precisely at those limits, reinforcing the galaxy's natural edge to ensure nothing could cross the line between where the Force exists and where it doesn't. But here's the thing, and this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Were the Celestials keeping something out, or were they locking something in? Because there's already something inside the galaxy that might have come from beyond it. And it has a name. Mongol Mongal. It is, by a considerable margin, the most terrifying entity in all of Star Wars lore. Fans who know the deep Legends material bring up this name unprompted when discussing what the barrier might be keeping out, and once you know what Mongol Mongal is, you'll understand why. Introduced in that same 2010 Unknown Regions sourcebook, with additional lore in Fry's Essential Guide to Warfare Author's Cut, Mongol Mongal isn't a creature. It isn't a species. It's a single vast organism of unknown origin, a sentient, shape-shifting entity existing primarily in the unknown regions. Its physical form is a gray, viscous ooze that can blanket entire worlds, fill oceans, cover landscapes. It possesses a malevolent intelligence, and it has one signature ability that makes everything else in Star Wars horror look quaint. It infects living beings, consumes them from the inside, and puppets their corpses as extensions of its own consciousness. Gray fluid oozing from the eyes, from the mouth, from every wound. The infected stumble and lurch, but they speak, with Mongol Mongal's voice, because every puddle is Mongol Mongal. Every contaminated ocean is Mongol Mongal. Every reanimated corpse shambling across a dead world is the same single mind wearing a billion different masks. It doesn't just consume civilizations, it wears them. It decorates its domain with collected bodies like a macabre gallery. The entity is literally cataloged on the H.P. Lovecraft wiki. The Lovecraftian comparison isn't a stretch, it's a classification. The detail that matters most? Nobody knows where Mongol Mongal came from. The lore states plainly that its origins were shrouded in mystery. It was completely unique. Nothing else like it existed in the known galaxy. It didn't fit into any established biological or force-based taxonomy. And the strongest implication across the source material is that Mongol Mongal may be extragalactic in origin. Something that came from outside. Something that got in before the door was shut. Or, and this is the reading that really gets under your skin, something that was already here when the Celestials decided to build the barrier, because they'd seen what one of these things could do and refused to let another one through. Which brings us to the question that changes everything about the most iconic weapon in science fiction. What if the Death Star was never about the rebels? Think about it. Everyone knows the Death Star. Moon-sized battle station, single-shot planetary destruction, built by the Empire to terrorize systems into obedience. That's the movie version. Simple, clean. But the Legends continuity tells a very different story. And it starts with Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn was a Chiss military genius from the unknown regions. He'd spent years patrolling the fringes of known space, and in that time, he'd encountered evidence of something approaching the galaxy from the intergalactic void, the Yuuzhan Vong. An entire civilization from another galaxy. Not scouting parties, not refugees, an invasion force, traveling in living ships grown from bioorganic technology, wielding weapons that were alive, wearing armor that was alive, serving gods of pain and sacrifice. And the detail that connects everything we've been talking about. The Yuuzhan Vong were completely cut off from the Force. They existed outside it. They couldn't be sensed, couldn't be predicted, were immune to many Force techniques. They were, in the most literal sense, creatures of the void. Thrawn understood the scale of what was coming. According to Timothy Zahn's novels, including the Hand of Thrawn duology published in 1998, this knowledge was one of the primary reasons Thrawn ultimately allied himself with Palpatine's empire. He wasn't serving the Empire out of loyalty. He was building a war machine because he knew the galaxy would need one. And Palpatine knew too. Through his mastery of the dark side, he'd experienced Force visions of a terrible threat approaching from beyond the galaxy's edge. Timothy Zahn's 2006 novel, Outbound Flight, tells the story of a Jedi-led expedition launched around 27 BBY, proposed by Jedi Master Joruus C'baoth, that intended to leave the galaxy entirely. Palpatine, still the seemingly benevolent Supreme Chancellor, secretly arranged for the project's destruction. He manipulated Thrawn into intercepting and destroying the expedition, killing nearly all aboard. The surface reading is that Palpatine killed a ship full of Jedi as part of his long game against the Order. The deeper reading? He didn't want anyone venturing into intergalactic space because he knew what was out there, and he didn't want the Vong to know the galaxy had found them before it was ready to fight. Now look at the Empire's military buildup through that lens. The Rebel Alliance, at its peak, fielded a few dozen capital ships and a handful of starfighter squadrons. Against them, the Empire maintained 25,000 Star Destroyers, millions of TIE Fighters, 2 Death Stars, a Sun Crusher, a Galaxy Gun, World Devastators, a superweapon pipeline that never stopped producing new planet-killing technologies. That's grotesquely disproportionate to the rebel threat. It's like building a nuclear arsenal to fight a guerrilla insurgency, unless the insurgency isn't what you're building for. When the Yuuzhan Vong finally invaded in 25 ABY, years after Palpatine's death, years after the Empire's collapse, they proved exactly as devastating as Thrawn and Palpatine had feared. Roughly 365 trillion sentient beings died. Coruscant itself fell. The galactic capital, occupied and terraformed by an extragalactic species that the Force couldn't even see. The New Republic, without the Empire's superweapon infrastructure, barely survived. The Death Star wasn't a hammer built to crush ants. It was a shield built to stop something that the galaxy's greatest Force user had seen coming from the darkness between galaxies. And that changes everything about what the Empire was. Now, Star Wars isn't the only franchise that stared into the void between galaxies and flinched. And the comparisons are, honestly, kind of wild. Take Warhammer 40k. The Tyranids are pouring in from the intergalactic void. Extragalactic, bioorganic, all-consuming. Sound familiar? Bioorganic invaders from beyond the galaxy, impossible to reason with, consuming everything in their path? They're basically the Yuuzhan Vong if you remove the speed limit and the mercy. Same basic nightmare. Threats from beyond the galaxy's edge that make internal wars look like squabbles. Star Trek took a completely different approach. In the original series pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, the Enterprise actually crossed the galactic barrier. And what happened? Crew members didn't lose their psychic abilities. They gained them. Crew member Gary Mitchell developed godlike abilities and went violently insane. So Star Trek's barrier doesn't drain the supernatural, it supercharges it. Same result though, madness at the edge. And then there's Stargate, where characters just step through a portal into the Pegasus galaxy 3 million light-years away like they're catching a bus. No existential dread, no cosmic horror, no ancient barriers or eldritch ooze monsters. Just a wormhole and a see you on the other side. It's almost comically casual compared to Star Wars, where the galaxy is essentially a locked room, and everybody's forgotten there's a door because the door was welded shut billions of years ago by gods who had a very good reason. That contrast is what makes the Star Wars version so compelling. In most science fiction, the question, what's beyond the galaxy, is just a logistics problem. More space, more aliens, pack a lunch. In Star Wars, it's a metaphysical horror story. The thing that defines your universe, the Force, simply ends. And in the space where it doesn't exist, things live that shouldn't. Things that consume worlds and puppet corpses and travel in ships made of living tissue and can't be sensed through the Force because they exist outside it entirely. So maybe the galaxy isn't home. Maybe it never was. Maybe it's a cage, built by beings so ancient they make the Jedi look like children, reinforced by the energy of a supermassive black hole, patrolled at its edges by the kind of dread that drives Force users insane before they even reach the wall. And the real question was never what's keeping us in, it's what's being kept out, and whether the door still holds. Drop your theory below, and subscribe for more stories like this.